Bonsai doesn't have to be expensive. I'm going to show you how you can start growing trees from locally collected seeds, and if you keep watching, I'll show you a superb example of a tree which I'm growing for free, and you can do the same. Here are 3 examples of oak trees that I've grown simply by planting acorns into soil and leaving to grow. This first tree is probably about 2 years old now. And the middle tree and this tree at the end are about 3, perhaps 4 years old. The key to growing trees from seeds is patience. However, there are techniques you can use if you want to grow your trees more rapidly. It may be difficult to credit it, but these 2 trees are actually the same age, grown from acorns at the same time. One is in a little pot, the other has been left to grow naturally in the ground, and you can see a dramatic difference in the size. And simply put, that's because a tree grown in the ground has greater access to nutrients, water and other resources when it needs them, whereas a tree grown in a pot is growing in an artificial environment that we maintain, and that puts the tree's development into slow motion. I do bang on about growing trees in the ground, but this is precisely why. So these little trees that you've seen, I simply planted some locally collected acorns into a pot and left them to grow. I've been collecting more seeds from the local neighbourhood, and so I'm going to plant some of these up, and I've got acorns and sweet chestnut, and I've also collected some Paul's Scarlet Hawthorn from the tree which overhangs my garden. So I've had lots of these drop into the garden, and it's a beautiful double red flower. So I'm going to plant some of those up and see if we can't get that to germinate. I'm just going to fill each of these little pots with some potting mix, and my potting mix is a mixture of molar clay, perlite, agricultural grit and agricultural sand, and a tiny bit of regular garden compost. So I'm just going to fill these pots, and then I'm going to pop the seeds that I've got into those and label them up. Fairly straightforward. So we now have our little seed pots ready, and all I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to take the sweet chestnut and I'm just going to insert those into the pot. Nothing particularly fancy or sophisticated. What I'm doing is I'm trying to replicate what nature would be doing. So the seed has fallen off the floor, the little funny green casing will have split open and the seed will be on the floor, and that will settle into the soil. And what would happen is that over winter the repeated freezing and thawing would crack that outer shell. That seed would then germinate and grow into a tree. So all I'm doing is I place that shallow into the pot here, and I'm just going to leave that out over. Next up in my collected seeds is some acorns, and you can see that already the casing on here is beginning to split, and in fact acorns will actually germinate prior to winter, and they will start developing roots as soon as possible, really, because the seed has a lot of stored energy in it, and that gives it a head start come spring of next year. So same sort of thing, I'm just going to pop these into the pot. And I've just got the top of the seed showing there. So I just make a little hole in the soil, pushing that down into there and leaving that to do its thing. Growing Japanese maples from seeds can be a rewarding experience, but it requires patience and careful attention to the plant's needs. Here are some steps to follow. Collect the seeds. Japanese maple seeds are found inside a winged fruit called a samara. They are usually ripe in the fall, at the end of October or early December. Look for healthy ripe samaras on the tree and collect them by hand. Store the seeds in a cool, dry place until you're ready to plant them. The seeds have a hard outer casing and need a period of stratification before they will germinate. This means that the seeds need to experience freezing and thawing, which will crack the outer casing and wake the seed. Some people do this by placing the seeds into the freezer, but I much prefer to plant them and put them outside to experience this naturally through the winter months. Prepare the soil. Japanese maples prefer well-draining soil that is rich in organic matter. Mix together equal parts of peat moss, perlite and sand to create a soil mixture that will provide the ideal growing conditions for your seeds. Plant the seeds. Fill a seed tray with soil mixture and moisten it with water. Plant the seeds shallowly and cover with a thin layer of soil. Water the tray gently, being careful not to disturb the seeds. Provide the right environment. Japanese maple seeds need a cool, sheltered environment to germinate. Check the soil regularly to ensure that it stays moist but not waterlogged. Transplant the seedlings. In spring, the seeds will sprout and form a pair of cotyledons, proto-leaves, shortly followed by their first true leaves, which will look more like typical maple leaves. After the seeds have germinated and the seedlings have grown to a couple of inches tall, they can be carefully transplanted into individual pots, filled with the same soil mixture. Keep the soil moist and provide seedlings with a bright, indirect sunlight. Growing Japanese maples from seeds is a rewarding experience that requires patience and careful attention to the plant's needs. By following these steps, you can be successful in growing your own Japanese maple trees from seed. These are examples of Japanese maples grown from collected seeds. And there's a lot of fuss about stratifying the seeds, which is putting them through a process of winterization, and some people put those into a freezer for several weeks, whereas I find the best way to grow them is to simply plant them out and let them do their thing naturally, as they would if they just fell from the tree in nature. What that process of stratification is doing is waking the seeds. By repeated freezing and thawing, the hard outer casing is cracked, allowing the seed to germinate and put out shoots. This cherry tree is another tree which just simply self-seeded into the front garden, and I dug that up and put that into a pot. You can also grow successfully from cuttings. Things like cotoneaster will take very readily from cuttings. And I just simply pop these into some soil and leave them to develop. And they develop roots quite easily. And in fact, this little tree here was grown in exactly that way. And this is about 3 to 4 years old now, grown from a cutting. The cotoneaster here was also grown from a cutting and is about 3 years old. This tree self-seeded in this flower bed. I need to dig this out before it becomes too established. The aim is to cut around the tree and sever any lateral growing roots just below the surface, and then to lift this out and reduce any downward growing or tap roots, so that I can eventually fit this into a more shallow pot or basket. To complicate things, I'm trying to avoid causing too much damage to a Japanese maple that's growing just behind it. So here is our tree, and I don't mind telling you that was much more of a wrestling match than I'd anticipated. I didn't collect quite as much of the root. I perhaps expected to collect a wider root ball than I did. It was a bit tricky because this tree was growing next to a Japanese maple, so I had to be careful not to damage that one too much. But as you can see, it's come out. There is some root on there. I'm going to just tidy up some of these big thick roots which are growing downwards, and then I'm going to secure that into this perforated basket with some bonsai soil. I'm a big fan of these shallow aerated baskets. They've got lots of perforations all around the sides, and that's because those perforations allow air through to the roots. And what we want in these young trees is to develop strong, healthy roots. The fact that the baskets are quite shallow as well means that you get a flatter root base. And the fact that those roots can't grow downwards means you get a more radial, outward growing set of roots. And that's what we want. We want a set of fine, radial feeder roots on the trees to make them as healthy and strong as possible and get them ready for life in a bonsai pot. There is a direct link between the development and refinement of roots of a bonsai tree and the corresponding branching. The health and structure of a tree's roots directly influence its above ground growth, including branching and ramification. Healthy roots are essential for absorbing water and nutrients from the soil. Adequate nutrient uptake supports vigorous growth and branching in the above ground portions of the tree. Proper root pruning techniques such as root trimming and root ball reduction encourage finer root growth and density. This in turn promotes finer branching and ramification above ground. The balance between the root system and the above ground portion of the tree is crucial for overall aesthetic and health. A well-balanced root system will support balanced branching and ramification, creating a harmonious bonsai tree. So for purely practical reasons and to get this growing in a shallower basket, I need to reduce some of this particularly downward growth in the roots. And take that root off. Perhaps even a little higher up. And I'm now going to secure this into this perforated basket in some soil. Try and arrange those roots so they will start growing more radially going forward. I'm less concerned about the state of the roots now in terms of where they're growing. What's more important is the health of the tree and making sure that this survives now with this reduced root mass. So let's get it secured in the pot and get some soil in there. I'm now just getting some tie wires into the basket which will hold the tree in place and keep that steady whilst the roots are recovering. I'm a big fan of these perforated baskets because they provide a lot of aeration and drainage to the roots. I found that particularly when I'm developing Japanese maples, they benefit greatly from being in these baskets. The fact that it's quite wide as well means that the roots develop more laterally, which is exactly what we want in order to get the tree into a more shallow basket in the future. I now need to get some soil in there to get the tree in, so I'm just mounding up in the middle. And because this is a newly collected tree, it's not a refined tree. This is just going into some molar clay, kitty friend pink molar clay soil. I'm just going to try and arrange that as best I can. And I might need to just reduce the roots again a little. Just to get that to sit lower in the basket. So I think that's where the tree is going to sit. So I'm going to now just secure those wires and try and hold it in place, keep it steady in the pot. So I'm just pulling on the wire and twisting. So the wire's coming out from this side of the pot, round the tree, and to this side, and onto the shoulder of the root there, just pulling that down. And same on the other side, so the wire's coming out from this side, across. There's a convenient big root here that I can use to brace the wire over. So I'm going to pull on the wire, create some tension in there, and twist at the same time until that becomes taut and holds the tree in the pot. Just snip off the excess, and that should do the job of holding that steady in there. So I can now fill the basket and make sure those roots are covered. And this is a great example of a piece of bonsai material which I got for free. It quite literally was just seeded naturally into that flower bed in the front garden, and if I'd left it there it would have become a problem, perhaps interfering with the foundations of the building. Oh, there we go. And so there we have it, our birch tree collected from the front garden, potted up into a pot. We're now going to develop those roots and let those grow. But I've also got other plans for this tree. I wouldn't normally recommend performing more than one major operation on a bonsai tree in any one season, so you'd normally either work the roots or do significant trimming. However, this tree was a free tree, collected out of the garden. It's cost me nothing, and therefore I'm willing to be a bit more risky with it and be a bit more dramatic. And so I'm actually planning to do a severe trunk chop on this tree about here. And in the past I've had quite good success with doing severe trunk chops, particularly on birches and hornbeams. And what I'm hoping is going to happen is that all of the energy which is stored in this lower portion of the trunk is going to surge up the tree, and at the cut point it's going to start forming buds and therefore create a new canopy on the tree. It's a bit of a Hail Mary cut. I'm taking a little bit of a risk, but it's an experiment, and also it was a free tree, so there isn't really a great deal of risk involved there. So let's get to it. And there you go. In fact, I'm also wondering if perhaps I could go quite a bit lower than that. So indeed, let's do that. I found that it can be quite beneficial to cut at a diagonal as well. So that's what we've got, a diagonal cut on the tree there. Now, some people might worry about pathogens and about that becoming wet or bleeding too much. This time of year, I'm not really concerned. Again, it's a free tree, so let's see what happens. What I'm hoping is to get branches and buds forming around the cut site, and eventually we'll develop a new canopy on what is now effectively just a stump of a tree. Some people might have suggested that perhaps I should have air-laid that. Who's got time for that? And I've got some other trees in the garden that I'm intending to do that with anyway. Performing a severe trunk chop on a young birch sapling can have profound effects on its growth and development. By removing the upper trunk just 6 inches above the roots and leaving no upper branches while the tree is dormant, it prompts the tree to redirect its stored energy towards forming new buds and branches. This dramatic pruning technique stimulates the birch sapling to undergo a vigorous response as it taps into its reserves to initiate new growth from dormant buds along the trunk. This is exactly what foresters do when pollarding trees. The results of this severe trunk chop is a rejuvenated birch sapling with a more compact and potentially thicker trunk as new branches emerge from the cut site and the lower portion of the tree. I've had success with this dramatic approach at this time of year with birch and hornbeam trees. It's worth pointing out that not every species of tree will form advantageous buds when performing such a severe trunk chop, so it's worth checking out the details for your particular tree. Now, I'm not quite finished with this tree. You may have heard of the black bag technique, and if not, that's a method whereby we cover the tree, particularly sick or unwell trees, in a black bag. And what that does is it does 2 things. It increases the moisture and the humidity around the tree, and that also promotes hormonal changes within the tree, which causes it to put out buds. So what I'm planning on doing is covering this tree with a black bag, and I'm going to check the tree in perhaps a month's time and see how that is getting on. And what I'm hoping to see is lots of buds beginning to develop on that tree. If I had a greenhouse, I would pop this now into a greenhouse. Unfortunately, I don't. So what I'm going to do is just put it into a quiet corner of the garden where it won't be disturbed and leave it for a month, 6 weeks, and come back and see how that's doing. And when I do that, I will show you exactly how the tree's getting on. This is my first time using this technique, so it's something of an experiment for me, but let's see how we get on. A good bonsai starts with a good trunk. The trunk is the framework on which everything else literally hangs. Nabari. My preferred way to develop nabari is in a wide aerated basket. This develops shallow roots and provides aeration for healthy development. Branches and foliage. This comes with ramification and can be developed once the trunk has been developed to the right stage. Branches and ramification can be built or rebuilt in a short number of growing seasons. Ramification comes from judicious pruning and pinching out or pruning of the growing tips of the branches. That causes back budding and activates latent buds further along the branch to develop and form new branches. It causes a continual subdivision along the branches. Foliage pads. These are a final step in refinement. Once you've got the trunk and you've developed the branches, you can then worry about placement of the foliage. You may possibly have seen in a recent video where I dug a silver birch sapling which had self-seeded into a garden flower bed. I dug that tree out, put it into a basket, did a severe trunk chop on that, leaving it with nerve branches, and then I covered it in this black plastic bag. There is a technique in bonsai, the black bag technique, and the idea is that that creates a sweat bag environment. It increases the temperature and maintains the moisture in there, and that helps promote growth of buds. And I did say that at the right moment, when I reveal this bag, I would show you the results. So here we go. So we're not seeing huge amounts of buds on here. Perhaps that's because this tree was sat in a more shaded part of the garden, whereas I believe if it had been in full sun, that would have raised the temperature, raised the humidity in the bag. But there are definitely buds on this stump, so I consider that to be something of a success. And you can just see in here we've got a nice bud forming there, and there's another one just in there, and we've got a little bud forming just here as well. So I'm hoping that these are going to form shoots. We're going to get foliage on there, and that's going to help the tree to grow and recover. I had hoped that perhaps we might get some around the cut site, but if not, that's not necessarily a problem. If you do a severe trunk chop on a tree at the right time of year, all the stored energy in that tree is fizzing and popping and ready to rise up the tree. And when there's nowhere for it to go, it causes it to create these adventitious buds, which with good luck and good management will form new branches and shoots and help us to rebuild a canopy on this tree, and we'll have a much shorter tree. And that's effectively what I did on my hornbeam stumpy tree that you've seen. So this is the tree that was self-seeded into a flower bed in my front garden. This is the last of the trees that I'm going to show you, and I hope you'll agree it's quite a dramatic transformation from when you last saw it. So this is the tree that was self-seeded into a flower bed in my front garden, and I performed quite a severe trunk chop on it several months ago, and it was just literally a featureless stump, and you can see now that it has a mass of branches and foliage on there, which will give me multiple options when it comes to actually styling this tree. And it's a dramatic example that you can remove the branches and the canopy on a tree and regrow that branching from scratch in just a number of seasons. This is the state of the tree as at the end of September. You can see that I've wired some of the branches into place and wired up a leader, and over the growing season I've been trimming the ends of the branches to increase ramification. It's had a healthy dose of burn meal feed to help promote growth of the roots through winter, and I look forward to continuing to develop this tree in the next growing season. It's worth bearing in mind that this is a reliable, repeatable process, so you can do exactly the same and get the same results. So what's stopping you? If you've enjoyed this video or it's been of any use to you, then please hit the like button and consider subscribing to be notified of future videos.